My name is Jonathan Westreich. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C., with an office also in Alexandria, Virginia. Here talking about recovery of stolen domain names. In addition, I have today my client, Michael Lee, whose domain name was stolen and then recovered by me and my coworkers. What we're going to start with this afternoon is Mr. Lee is going to talk to you about what happened, how he lost his domain, and then how he came to us, and then I'll talk about how we went about recovering it, and then sort of in general terms, how you can go about recovering domain names in general. So this is Michael Lee, and he's going to talk to you about his domain name problem.
Hello, everybody. Just to give you some background, I am president of Michael Lee Associates. We're an ad agency in Chicago. We purchased the domain MLA.com back in 1997. Prior to that, I was using michaellee.com, but I was looking for a more attractive, catchy name, and our agency had a web presence with our clients, so we wanted something that was short and sweet, and it was affordable back then. The domain itself was tied to all our business and personal email. GoDaddy was our registrar since 2011, and up until 2013, everything was great. We had a great roster of clients, business was running smoothly, and then as a small agency, there were no complaints. Now on May 17th of 2013, this is how it starts. We got a couple of emails from GoDaddy stating that contact information had changed and the domain was unlocked. So my partner and I were kind of scratching our heads and immediately called customer service and restored the contact information, changed the password, and relocked the domain. And then we tested the email, and it didn't work. So we thought, well, maybe their system was refreshing. So tried again, tried to log back in, and it was unsuccessful. Our password was no longer recognized. So we thought, we were patient, we thought GoDaddy was trying to refresh. So we called them again. They asked for a PIN verification code. They directed us to an online form to fill out. So we waited, we called them back and asked them what's up, and they said, don't bother, the domain's gone, it's no longer in our database. So within a span of 2 hours, the domain had gone from GoDaddy to a different registrar, internet.bs in the Bahamas. Keep in mind, this is all, I'm in advertising, I'm not in this business of domains and registrars and ownership, so it was a bit of a shock. So we immediately called customer service back, what we can do, this is a big mistake, something's happened. So they start to give me things that they need from me. They need my customer ID and then my driver's license, blah, 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 photo ID. They want me to prove who I am, that I had it in the first place. And then a funny thing happened over the course of those hours is that GoDaddy went from a very customer service friendly web register. I'm sure you've seen the commercials. They're happy and friendly, and they are when you answer the phone. But once I would mention my domain and the theft, I was immediately regulated to voicemail, to talk to email, to disputes at GoDaddy.com. So the tone definitely changed immediately. I still went through the process of trying to prove who I was in order to get the domain back. I was still under the assumption that this was an easy fix. It's going to take 24 hours. I'll show them everything that they want. They wanted my articles of incorporation, my business license, my driver's license, yada, yada, yada. I'm, all the local agencies chasing all this paperwork, trying to provide who it is, till finally it dawns on me that any resolution dealing with GoDaddy is a dead end. So we start to scratch our head and think, well, what else can we do? So we came up with different avenues. Well, let's call the FBI, start looking at legal firms, go through ICANN, and talk directly with internet.bs and try to plead to them, show that it was a fraudulent transfer. And through each one of these avenues, I mean, the FBI, they were great. They listened, they took notes, they created a case file, and then I never heard from them again. We looked at some top law firms in Chicago, thinking that we could scare them with a big letterhead. Didn't go anywhere because the law firms that we talked to either wanted enormous retainers or they really had no knowledge of what a domain was, what intellectual property was in terms of domain names, had no experience in it, so just really weren't interested. We talked to, not talked, but we emailed through ICANN and realized we thought this was the governing body for the internet and realized it's really just a paper tiger, that they're unable to enforce any of their rules, and they just encourage us to work between the registrars to get them to come to some kind of a settlement of retransfer. And then I also tried to work with internet.bs. I got their attention through an online chat, and that resulted in an email from one of their top people who told me that he would lock the domain pending an investigation. This pissed off the hacker that stole it. His domain was locked now. So he starts emailing me directly saying that, hey, I paid for this. Why are you reneging? And which is totally news to me. So I asked for a copy of all the emails that we supposedly negotiated with, and he said that we made this transaction through Liberty Reserve, which was kind of ironic because Liberty Reserve, about a week and a half prior to that, was seized by the FBI and other agencies as a fraudulent escrow website because I think it was like a money laundering website, something like that. So he was citing a transaction base that no longer existed. The emails that he sent me, I had them analyzed as well through looking at the headers. And then it started to get scary. So then this is where we found Stephen and Jonathan through this time lag period of finding out what to do, really got educated on what was domain theft, who had experience in it, and these guys kept coming up. So talked to Stephen quite a bit back and forth, and then on June 11th, retained their services. Stephen had a technical consultant that reviewed the emails that the hacker would send to and from me, and through analysis found out that he was using a VPN proxy to hide himself. So emails that would go like 5 minutes apart, an hour apart, were coming from Luxembourg and Canada and Australia. So he definitely wasn't being forthright with who he was and where he was coming from, which was a big tip-off. And in the midst of all that, losing your domain as your primary, it's a piece of your primary identity. So having it in business since 1997, I had to regroup continuously because people who would send me emails about new projects or existing projects, they weren't getting to me. They were bouncing because I didn't have that domain anymore. So I was coping with the loss of business, and one of the worst things that you can worry about in business is silence, and I got a lot of that. All of a sudden it was very quiet because it's an age of email. Phones aren't used like they used to be. So if people can't get a hold of you, a lot of my clients work with multiple agencies, and they go to the next one on the roster. They've got a hot project, and if you can't respond, he didn't get back to me, goes to the next person. So I lost a lot of business over the course of 8 to 12 months while we had to rebuild client awareness of our new email, our new website, and how to get in contact with us. So we restored the website, we restored the emails. We would send out emails to clients saying, you know, this is my old address, this is my new address, but I'm sure you guys get a lot of emails. You look at it, you throw it away. Some people, it got maybe a 20 to 25% effective rate. And then, not to mention, when you have an email address and it's tied to all of your credit cards, your utilities, Netflix, whatever, you kind of take it for granted. And then when that's gone and those bills come up and all of a sudden your services get turned off because you didn't pay the bill, because you didn't get the email, the statement, you know, blah, 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 then it starts to really sink in how tied you were to that domain and that email. I tried to do a lot of green invoicing where I didn't get paper copies anymore. I got strictly emails on everything, and that sort of backfired on me. In the meantime, word starts to get out in the domain community. And the first article was written by this gentleman, Theo, who runs the Domain Gang. And he published an article on the theft of MLA.com. And he's kind of got the word out, and people who are in this industry, the domain community and brokers that buy and sell domains were aware of it. And I would get emails and phone calls from brokers saying, I'm interested in buying this domain. I just want to know, is it clear and legal? And I would say, stay away from it. It's, I'm going to get it back. You're going to get burned. So the word was out there. And then there was also an article written on the Huffington Post about it. It's, which was, pretty in-depth. He interviewed me over the course of a month, maybe a dozen conversations on all the parameters that go into it. Then we've also there's an upcoming article in the Wall Street Journal and Wired Magazine, British edition. So towards, I'd say October of 2014, the hacker, this Russian Alex, if that's his real name, he starts to correspond with me again, saying, okay, 19,000, let's get over it. Let's not give this money to lawyers. But I knew that it was, coming to a close. It had been enough time. Jonathan will fill you in on the different steps that they went about, but I knew we were close. So I contested whether he was the person that stole it at all. When you get emails from somebody and they say, I've got what's yours, give me money, blah, blah, blah. So I said, how do I even know it's you? And it was interesting because he said, I'll tell you the password I used to log into your account. So and then he sent me my password, and that was kind of a shock. So and he also made a point of telling me that it wasn't GoDaddy's fault, which I still scratch in my head on why he would even give them the courtesy. And then back and forth he lowers the price. So December 23rd we received word that it had been decided in our favor, and in January of this year we got the domain back, thanks to Jonathan and his team. And that's my story. So Jonathan can cue you in on how he went about getting it.
So like a lot of things in the law, it's not always that exciting. And whenever I give speeches like this, the first thing I always have to say is that every case is a little different, and I'm not appearing as your lawyer, unless, of course, if you want to hire me, and then I'm happy to do so. But I'm going to start with sort of how it's done, how domain names are stolen. And the most common way is your email gets hacked, or social engineering. Somehow the bad actors get your passwords, and then they log into your registry, and then they change all the registry information and then transfer it to another registry, and by the time it's gone, it's gone. There are some other less common ways that they're stolen, back-end hijacking or hacking into the hosting company, the actual registrar, but that is less common. The more common way is losing control of your email and your passwords, which is why all the security people are always telling us to always change our passwords. I'm sure none of you change them as often as they tell us to. I certainly know that I don't change it as often as I probably should, but that is, particularly if you have a number of domains, very important. How it's discovered, as Michael just told you, usually emails are starting to get bounced. You get notes from your registrar saying, we're sorry you transferred it. We hope to hear from you again in the future. And that's usually the way it's discovered. How to get it back. The first thing, of course, is to do what Mr. Lee did, contact the registrar immediately. Some registrars are very active in recovering domains, others are less so. And unfortunately, it's one of those places where it depends on who you get. So different people at these different organizations are more aggressive than others. It shouldn't be that way, but it really is. There's also an inter-registry dispute process where if one registrar believes another registrar is acting improperly, they can dispute their conduct. It's very rare that results in an effective change, as in getting your domain name back. The second step that Michael talked about is ICANN, or the UDRP process. Again, that's not generally effective. There was one decision in December 2014 where it did work, involving a domain name CIN.com, but there were some unique facts there, and I'm not aware of it working in other situations. It is important to try, though, because one of the things the court's going to look at is what you've done already to try to recover the domain name. If all that doesn't work, then you go to court. It's called cyber squatting, and that's my area. That's where I do my work. Domain names, the suffix after the data, I just call it TLD, top-level domain. A significant number of them are located in Northern Virginia, .com, .net, .org, .tv, .edu, and a host of others, which is why these hearings, these pleadings are all filed in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The good news is the judges there are very smart and very experienced with exactly these kinds of issues. That can also be bad news if you don't have all the facts you need to get the relief, but I have friends of mine in other courts in other parts of the country where they've had less success because they have to educate the judges. We don't have to educate our judges. They understand how to do this. Under the current system, to recover a domain name, you have to have intellectual property rights in the domain name you're seeking to recover. And there's two ways you get intellectual property rights. One is if you have a registered trademark. The other is through common law rights through use in commerce. For Mr. Lee, using MLA.com for his business, that was use in commerce over many years, and that was certainly sufficient. A lot of people use domain names for pay-per-click advertising, where they make money based on the number of clicks that come through their domains. It is not clear whether that is sufficient use in commerce in order to get the necessary trademark rights. I did argue that in the case in 2010 and was successful in convincing the court that that was sufficient use in commerce, although other lawyers have made that argument and not been successful. It's not because I'm that good a lawyer. I think it's just that I was able to convince the judge that day. Once you establish that you have intellectual property rights, you have to serve the other side. And normally in a lawsuit, you have to physically serve them with a paper. The problem in a case like Mr. Lee's is, and most of these cases, is you don't really know who you have on the other side. The bad actor in the MLA case ostensibly was a Mr. Kremnev in Russia. The address he listed on the computer records was somewhere near Moscow. So I'm not sure that he really was there, and certainly the address was bogus because emails were returned. He did have an email address that worked for a while, and then emails bounced as well. And that's common in these cases. A lot of the actors who steal these domains are in China or Russia, or ostensibly in China and Russia. We don't really know exactly where they are, who they are. I just filed one on Monday where the bad actor was in China, or at least he said he was in China. I'm fairly confident that the address was bogus since the zip code was 112233. I'm not familiar with the Chinese mail system, but I'm fairly confident that that was a bogus address. And so the statute allows for proceeding what's called in rem, which means we're not really suing the other side. We're dealing simply with the thing itself, the domain names. And so there's a process for proceeding against the domain name, publishing in the newspaper. That gives the court jurisdiction to proceed. The result of that is that you can get the domain name back, but you generally can't get money judgment against the bad actor, which can sometimes be frustrating, but at least there's a system in place now to get your domain name back. There is some efforts in Congress right now by the ICA, the Internet Commerce Association, trying to change some statutes. I believe it's in either in the UDRP process or the Uniform Theft statutes to allow a different procedure so that you won't have to have trademark rights to recover your domain name. My ability to predict what Congress is going to do is limited, so I really couldn't tell you anything what that's likely to happen. Once you accomplish service, and by publishing in the newspaper, the next step is default judgment. Default judgment because the other side rarely appears. The process then is there's a mechanism where the court issues default judgment. You have a hearing in front of a magistrate judge outlining the facts and the complaint to convince the court to issue the default and return the domain name. That report is then sent to the U.S. District Court judge who enters a final order, and that's when you get your domain name back. the two questions that I'm always asked at the beginning of one of these cases is how long and how much? And that is always the $64,000 question. You know, in the world of the internet, something that takes a couple of days is really an extremely long time. In the law, this takes about 6 to 8 months to get this done. And for those of you with experience in the legal system, that's light speed. But that's how long it takes. There's certain scheduling things with the court, when they'll hear things, when they won't hear things. A certain amount of time has to pass to give the other side a chance to respond. It is rare, but sometimes the other side does respond. What Mr. Lee talked about, where someone responds and says, you know, I didn't steal the domain name. I bought it fair and square, and I'll sell it back to you for just what I paid, because I'm a good guy. Happens a great deal. In my view, in the MLA case and the others I've been involved with, that was likely bogus. There's actually the thief who was trying to get paid. Then the question is how much? Again, as with all things with lawyers, it depends. It depends on how much time is involved and how complicated the facts are. Usually it's between $15,000 and $25,000 to recover a domain name. And people will say, well, why in God's name would I spend that much money to get a domain name back? There's a couple of reasons. One, if you're like Mr. Lee, it's tied into your business, and it's tied into your business identity. The other is there are lots of people who own lots of domain names and make stupendous amounts of money on the PPC, the pay-per-click traffic going through their domain names. And so if you own a lot of domain names, you can't get a reputation for being someone who lets your stuff be stolen. And that is a big part of why a lot of people proceed in court to get these domain names back. Not the most exciting area of law, I suppose, but it's very interesting. At least I find it interesting. And it's cutting-edge law, which means a lot of the times you're dealing with issues that are novel, and the law sometimes struggles with dealing with novel issues like this. But this is the way we're handling it now. That's pretty much the end of my prepared remarks, unless people have questions about how this process proceeds or anything else related to recovery of domain names.
Could you repeat how long again?
Usually it's about 6 to 8 months. Yeah. So as a general rule, when you file a lawsuit in federal court, you have to serve the other side. And if they're in the United States, you mail notice them, they have 60 days to respond, or 90 days if they're outside of the country. The cyber squatting statute that we're proceeding under allows you to publish notice in the newspaper. Some judges will say you have to wait 90 days for the guy in China, give him a chance to respond. Others will say, no, once you file, you can just go right to publication. And that usually depends on whether you're getting responses from emails. If emails are bouncing, then they'll say, well, you just go right to publication. Or even better, if you get a response back where it indicates the recipient received the court papers and is going to ignore you, then the court will sometimes let you proceed. And one of the things that I think is frustrating is that there's a lot of grays here, and there's a lot of, I don't really know how the court's going to act simply because this is so new, and 20 years ago, none of this existed. Or maybe 30 years ago. And when the trademark laws were written much longer before that, none of this stuff existed. And so in some ways we're putting a square peg into a round hole and trying to fit it into the established legal process. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You said that you have to have an evidentiary hearing to establish your property rights. So is that pre-suit, or that's immediately after filing? You have an ex parte hearing prior to service?
No, when you file the suit, you have to allege facts sufficient to show you have intellectual property rights in the domain name. So you either have to allege, I registered with the trademark office and here's the registration number, or more commonly, I've used it in commerce for this number of years and this is how I've used it, and that's enough to establish your intellectual property rights.
Okay, so you don't have to have a hearing prior to the service?
No, you don't actually, in most of these cases, there really is no hearing because the other side doesn't respond, and after the statutory time runs for them to respond, what's important is that all the facts are alleged in the complaint, so you can then say to the judge, the other side has conceded all these facts, but you have to have the facts there to show use in commerce. And that is, in many of these cases, the stumbling block showing sufficient use in commerce. Were there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you just mentioned that most of these cases involve hacking in some shape or form. What happens, I remember years ago, there were all these cases where you forgot to renew your domain name, didn't make a payment, someone else paid it.
Right.
These cases still happen.
They do still happen. Just in the last couple of weeks, when they released some new TLDs, Taylor Swift went and bought a bunch of them to avoid people buying taylorswift.porn. So there's the statute allows protections for things like exactly that, using your name in a derogatory manner. So if someone were to buy taylorswift.porn and then say to her, well, I'm going to put porn up on this unless you pay me $100,000, the statute allows recovery of that domain name. But that goes to my first point, that the best thing you can do is to prevent all this from happening in the first place by changing your passwords and keeping your domain names secure. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think I was referring to something else. For example, you pay for your website, you pay for a year for the domain name, and then say you miss your payment, obviously it's no longer your property in that sense. So someone else could just go pay that amount, transfer to a different agent, and then you still have a possibility of getting that back, because then of course they will make a demand and say, here, I have this domain name, it looks like a company, are you not interested in buying that back?
So, yes, you would. If you have sufficient use in commerce, so you have intellectual property rights in that domain name. That's a slightly more difficult case to argue, because you don't have a bad actor in that case. So that goes back to my first point of monitoring your domain names carefully. But that would be a more difficult case. But yes, you would have rights. I think he would. Yes, sir.
Can you recommend who would be one of the best registrars to work with in the future?
I cannot, because one, I don't know all of them, and two, if I were to speak poorly about one who I needed to work with later, that would be a bad practice. And it changes depending on who's in charge on that particular day.
I'll tell you, not GoDaddy.
And the really important thing is to monitor them. There are some software programs out there, I think Domain Tools is one of them, that will lock things up and send you notices if people try to do changes. But I'm a lawyer, I'm not a technical guy. So if you have a number of valuable domain names, then you would want to talk to your tech people to make sure they're secure. Yes, sir.
There are privacy packages that you could actually purchase when you secure a domain name. Is that a good way to prevent, just because it's not placed on a public registry, so nobody knows who the individual is that...
The problem with the privacy, what it is then no one really knows who exactly owns it, and that means sometimes you don't know if someone steals it. So if you don't have a system set up where you get the right information, they can be helpful, they can be not helpful. In a lot of my cases, a lot of the bad actors use the privacy settings so that we can't try to make it harder for us to figure out who has stolen the domain names. Yes, sir.
Can you explain the connection between Virginia and the top level?
So VeriSign, the registrar for the top level, for a number of the top level domains, not all of them, is in Northern Virginia. And the registration contract provides that that court has jurisdiction for all of them. Unless there are more questions, thank you all for coming.